Welcome to Module 2 in your autism training. As you learned in the first module, it can be hard to understand autism just by reading about it. So please watch this video of a university professor discussing her experiences as an autistic person.
This is a picture of me and my brother from when I was about 5 years old in the early 1980s. When I reflect on my own experience, I realized that from a very young age, I internalized that I wasn't normal, which was bad, that my needs were unreasonable, that I was unlikable, and that I had to change. And these beliefs, coupled with environmental stressors, led to anxiety, panic attacks, shame, stress, depression, meltdowns, and further trauma. My anxiety disorder is necessary for my survival because I have to be hyper-aware almost 100% of the time in order to successfully hide and suppress my natural autistic tendencies. Wherever I am, whether I'm at home with my family or at school or at work, I'm required to quote unquote mask my weird and attempt to pass as quote unquote normal or neurotypical. I believe that the problem is that people with autism are taught that we are broken and that who we are naturally is not okay. And this is an absolutely devastating message to internalize. But there is a brilliant end to my story. I survived the 80s, the 90s, and the turn of the millennium. It was really hard, and there were a lot of really dark days. We didn't know a lot about autism back then, and I didn't even receive my autism diagnosis until I was an adult. But now I'm a professor at the University of Alberta. More importantly, I am an autistic professional who studies autism. This slide highlights some of my many awards and achievements because I want to offer you hope that no matter how hard it is right now for your students with disabilities, it can get better. Neurominorities are at a high risk of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. One of the central features of depression is a negative or undesirable feeling of difference or deviance from others. Implying that to be a neurominority means to be fundamentally flawed as a person and then behaving accordingly is a particularly bad way of teaching youth that they have value and worth. Neurodiversity refers to the simple fact that all brains are different. As a society, we need to open our eyes to see that the diversity of human brains is a natural, healthy, and valuable form of human diversity. There is no normal style of human brain any more than there is one normal race, ethnicity, gender, or culture. And just as researchers recognize that biodiversity is necessary to ensure that we have a healthy and sustainable ecosystem, neurodiversity is just as critical to our survival as it is theorized to be essential for cultural stability. When we consider how to best support people who are more neurodiverse, we need to refocus our interventions on supporting, developing, and celebrating the person's unique strengths, instead of focusing on teaching us to act like everybody else. Our brains function differently. So if successful treatment means that we will think and behave exactly like everybody else, that treatment will always fail. Think of it like this. Using the principles of applied behavioral analysis, you could teach your cat to swim. But a cat who can swim is still a cat. It will never be a dog. In the same way, people with autism can learn to mask our autistic traits. We can learn neurotypical social rules, and at times we can even appear normal. But we will always be autistic. So the treatment goal has to be, how do we best support the individual to become a neurodiverse adult who flourishes? If we want to stop the rampant mental health problems among neurominorities, we have to make different choices. We need to stop stigmatizing people who are neurominorities as quote unquote less than normal. Instead, we must learn to emphasize the positives of neurodevelopmental differences. People with autism do not need to be cured. We may have higher support needs, but we also have a wide range of talents and abilities. Because so many of us have internalized that we are broken, teachers must help to increase our students' confidence in themselves. They need us to convey to them that they are good enough as they are right now, not as they might someday be in the future. And a good way to increase a student's self-worth is by appreciating their efforts and valuing their opinions. The more we can believe in our students' strengths, the more that we can see the good in them as they are, the more likely they will internalize that they have value and worth. People with autism often have a large number of strengths gifted to them by their neurology.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic Perspective. At this point, we want to discuss the ways in which people with autism describe themselves. People diagnosed with ASD describe themselves in a variety of ways. Some people prefer to use person-first language. For example, by saying, "I am a person with autism." This language frames a diagnosis as something one has rather than an identity one is. It conveys the fact that the person is more than simply autistic. Specialists are often taught to use this terminology. Other people with autism prefer identity-first language. For example, they might say, "I am autistic." This language situates autism as central to one's identity, like gender or race. Many autistic adults prefer this phrasing. Finally, some people with autism say that I am a person on the autism spectrum. This language bypasses debates about whether autism is something one has or is. According to an online survey, this terminology attracts similar levels of support as identity-first language. Please note that respectful terminology varies across people. It is a good idea to ask an autistic person what term they prefer and respect their preference. Let's now turn to consider common misconceptions about autism. There are many misconceptions about autism. Autism is not a disease or something to be cured. Autism is a way of being. It is pervasive. It colors every experience, every sensation, perception, thought, emotion, and encounter, every aspect of existence. It is not possible to separate the autism from the person. And if it were possible, the person you'd have left would not be the same person you started with. Another myth is that people with autism are all the same. It is very important to remember that people with autism may be very different from each other. That does not mean that they don't each have autism. Just as women can be very different from each other and Caucasians can be very different from each other, so too people with autism can be very different. Another myth is that autistic people lack interest in interacting with others. Many autistic people do want to interact with others, but may express their interest in ways that are unusual to non-autistic people. Autistic people often experience bullying and social rejection, which not only reduces opportunities for social interactions and skill development, but also increases mental health risks and may make people avoidant of others. Autistic people often have restricted and repetitive behaviors, which may restrict their ability to adapt to others and explore new environments. Another myth is that people with autism lack empathy. They do feel empathy, but may express it differently. Here are some examples and experiences reported by autistic people. "Since I can remember, I have been pierced and pained by the intensity of life." Don Eddings Prince. "I'm also someone who cares deeply about the world, about inequality, injustice, and am often the first person to help anyone who is lost, hurt, crying, or in trouble." Donna Williams. "I feel a lot inside, only I cannot express my feelings as openly as a normal person can." Callie. Let's talk now about how you can better understand and support autistic individuals. Autistic people have trouble with gestures and non-literal language. i.e., sarcasm. So communicate clearly and say what you mean. Be direct and avoid sarcasm and hyperboles. Remember, an autistic person wants to be treated with dignity and respect, just like any other human being. Asking autistic people to act more like non-autistic people, i.e., forcing eye contact or demanding that they not take breaks when needed, can cause them to feel intense self-doubt and exhaustion. Instead, ask about and listen to their experiences, identify shared experiences, and respect differences. Accept the fact that a failure to maintain eye contact does not indicate disinterest or disrespect. If you want to be an ally for people with autism, try following these guidelines. Focus on building from strengths. Always listen to and learn from autistic individuals. Collaboratively develop goals that embrace each person's intersectional identities. Prioritize well-being over normalization. Focus on improving the person-environment fit, and reduce pressure to communicate in a single way. We are almost finished. Let's quickly review some key terms. Neurodivergent is defined as having a brain that functions differently from dominant social norms, i.e., a brain that produces behaviors, cognitions, or experiences that society would recognize as disability. Neurotypical means having a brain that falls within societally accepted definitions of normal. Accessibility, the ability to access materials. Accommodations, an alteration of environment, curriculum format, or equipment that allows an individual with a disability to gain access to content and/or complete assigned tasks. Self-advocacy, the ability to speak up for yourself or the things that are important to you. Effective empathy, ability to understand another person's emotions or share the feelings of others. Stimming, self-stimulating behaviors, sometimes involving repetitive sounds or movements. Social communication. Social communication is the use of language in social contexts. It encompasses social interaction, social cognition, pragmatics, and language processing. Restricted interests and repetitive behaviors. They include repetitive movements with objects, repeated body movements such as rocking and hand flapping, ritualistic behavior, sensory sensitivities, and circumscribed interests. Hypersensitivity, abnormally or excessively sensitive, either psychologically or in physical response. You have finished the second part of the training. Please now take the second comprehension test.